It's time for Football at 4 with 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco.
My first allegiance is what will be best for the Philadelphia Eagles and our fans for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Yes, indeed. Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and is brought to you by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bets and take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com or download the PropSwap app today. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Andrew DiCecco's here on a Friday to answer your draft questions. If you have questions on the NFL draft for Andrew, you can text 609-403-0973. Or if you're watching the show live on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, leave a comment in the chat section, and Andrew will answer your NFL draft questions. We have questions for Andrew as well. We are less than a week away from the NFL draft, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline on this happy hour Friday. Andrew, what's going on, man?
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Happy to be talking a little draft, right? Are you tired out from the draft yet?
Let's just say I'm ready for it to get here.
All right. Well, people still have a ton of questions for you. We took a lot of questions early in the show in the build-up, getting ready to have you on. So let's throw a couple questions right off the bat. By the way, there was a trade that just happened in the NFL. I don't know if you saw this or not, but the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens made a trade. This is kind of interesting because Kansas City is trading its first-round pick along with 3 other picks in exchange for Pro Bowl tackle Orlando Brown. I guess the moral of this story might be that Kansas City, who needs offensive line help, that's obvious, didn't like the offensive tackles in this draft class.
I mean, that's one school of thought, but I mean, you could also say that they see that their window right now, they're trying to maximize that window, and they saw a chance to get a good veteran player that's going to add another piece to a loaded roster. And I mean, they're going to make another run. I mean, that was one of their biggest weaknesses, and now they've kind of rectified that.
Yeah. Now Baltimore will end up with the 27th and the 31st pick. So they will have 2 picks right there late in the first round for the Baltimore Ravens. And the Ravens are expected to sign Alejandro Villanueva, so they'll trade Brown, get a cheaper version there, and get another pick. So things are starting to happen here. So, Andrew, a lot of questions are coming in from our listeners today, and let's kind of unpack some of these things and kind of get your take on this. All right, let's see. Where do we want to start here and go? All right, I know there's guys. All right, you'll like this one. This is from Harris. What do you think of Werner or both Chaz Surratt being late picks? Would you double up on linebackers? Where do you project Werner and Surratt being?
Yeah, I think Warner and Surratt, they're going to be third-round picks, probably in the later portion of the third round. I like Warner a little bit better. I think, to me, he's a little bit more of a polished player, a little bit more pro-ready that you can throw in on defense, and he's going to step right in and make some plays. I think Surratt really he's more of a pass coverage linebacker, but he's very limited in terms of what he's able to do. I still think he needs to develop his play strength and really get a little bit he doesn't have a ton of he really stood out that one season. So, he really doesn't have a whole lot out there, and I think he has a lot of questions to answer about his game yet, whereas Warner, I think, is a little bit more of a pro-ready prospect.
So I agree. When the question came up earlier, I said probably third-round picks for both those guys. Do you think the Eagles need to end up with a linebacker or 2 in this particular draft?
Well, in the previous regime, it would be lucky if the Eagles took 1 linebacker. So to think that they would take 2 is a little bit. I don't necessarily see it going quite that way, but I do think that they're going to probably take 1 a little bit higher on the higher side. If I were them, I would go Baron Browning at 37, or I would consider trying to pry away Jabril Cox, who's going to go somewhere between 37 and 70 and find a way to get him. Those are two guys that I really like.
I want to get,
especially for that fit.
I want to get your opinion on something that Howie Roseman said the other day. He said, I don't want to close the book on last year's draft class, and we're excited about the new coaching staff getting their hands on these guys. Did you read that as we took guys last year that were talented, but our coaching staff didn't get enough out of them? And I say on the offensive side of the ball, Jalen Reagor. On the defensive side of the ball, they drafted a linebacker in the 3rd round last year who played nothing. He gave them Zippo on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah. Is that their way of saying we think this new defensive staff might get something out of him?
Well, those are comments that you would expect to hear, right? And I think to an extent there's something to that. I mean, in the case of Jalen Reagor, I thought he was a little bit misutilized, and he was billed as being this versatile offensive weapon that you can align everywhere and find different ways, creative ways to get him the football. And he was touted for his big play ability. But looking at someone like a Davion Taylor, I mean, when he was picked, he was never in the plans to step in right away and make contributions, right? I mean, he was at least 2 or 3 years away from being able to step in and make plays for the defense. He's more of a special teams guy, if that. He has a lot to learn about. He's relatively new to the game of football. So, I mean, I don't know how much the previous regime was really going to get out of a Davion Taylor regardless. I mean, there were certain players that I thought that they reached on, maybe questionable fits. So, I mean, I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag with that comment.
Yeah, and again, I'm not suggesting that I think Davion Taylor could play. You've well documented. You had him, as like a fifth rounder?
Yeah. 5th rounder, yeah.
All right, so we'll see what happens with Davion Taylor. That was a good question on the linebackers here. Beth wants to know about Kellen Mond, Davis Mills, could be late-round options. Another guy she wanted you to break down is Patty Fisher. Have the Eagles spoken to any of these guys?
I mean, to my knowledge, they haven't really poked and prodded too significantly at these guys. But, I mean, look, we'll look at the quarterbacks here. Kellen Mond and Davis Mills from Stanford. Those are two guys that have varying degrees of upside. And when you're looking at these day 3 quarterbacks, you're looking for traits, right? You're looking for characteristics that they have that may not be entirely refined, but something that if you get them in an NFL system, they can be ironed out and they might have something there. And I think both of those guys, in both cases, they both have NFL skill sets. They're just a little bit inconsistent in certain areas of their game. Kellen Mond, I would say he has a bit of an awkward delivery. But those are like the abilities is clearly there. And I think Brian Johnson will be able to get that, hopefully be able to tap into Jalen Hurts. And I certainly think he can do the same with a Kellen Mond or a Mills. As far as Patty Fisher is another one of those later round linebackers that I think that if they were to go 2 linebackers and double dip, he'd be someone that you take a shot on. I don't think he's athletic. I don't think he moves as well as some of the other guys that I've outlined. Yeah. But I think that he has a sharp football acumen, and those are the type of players that you like to get in. You like to select later in the draft because if you grab them, they can step in and make some plays right away.
All right, Bruce wants to know. He says, I don't think people are talking enough about Jalen Phillips to the Eagles. He is the top pass rusher to most scouts and teams. Has also a very similar build to DeForest Buckner of the Colts. I guess that Colt kind of connection there with that staff. Mm-hmm. But in your mind, everybody's talking about Kwity Paye and Rousseau. Is his teammate the best of that group?
Yeah, I mean, Jalen Phillips is someone who has intriguing intangibles. He certainly has that freakish build, but so does Rousseau. But I mean, when you're looking at Jalen Phillips, he does have that an injury history that's a bit concerning. If you're the Eagles, who you really need to take prospects with a clean bill of health, given their history, and they need guys who can step in and play right away. You already have a defensive end in Josh Sweat who has a lengthy injury history dating back to high school. I don't know if that's the route that I would necessarily go at 12 when there's other guys that are in a similar tier, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. And another comment on Rousseau was that he didn't test well at his pro day. He took the whole year off. Would that concern you, taking him at 12 or even trading back, say at where is the highest? Like if you traded back and they took Rousseau, where would you feel comfortable taking him? He worries me not playing very raw.
Yeah. Yeah, incredibly raw, and you always worry about those 1-year wonders, Mike. And as freakishly athletic as he may be, and he has the prototypical build, he still needs to add a lot of size to his frame. He only did it for one season. He really won on his athleticism. He didn't really have when his initial pass rush plan was shut down. He didn't know how to counter that. Just a raw player that was able to just win on sheer athleticism and size and his length. And when you're looking at a first round player, I mean, he's a bit more of a project compared to like a Kwity Paye or even Jalen Phillips or somebody like that. So I mean, he has an immensely high upside, but I just don't know that the Eagles are the team that's going to be able to roll the dice on him.
All right, Frank wants to know, Andrew, if the Eagles move up, what players do you think they would target in a move up scenario?
I certainly think Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts would be certainly guys that if they're going to move up, those are guys you're going to do. They're both probably the biggest, the most dynamic offensive playmakers in this draft, and would certainly add another dimension to an Eagles offense that isn't currently there. And they both have all pro potential. I mean, those guys are going to be. They both make big plays, and they both can affect all three levels of the field. And when you're moving up for a player like that, I mean, I think you do whatever. If those are your guys, you do whatever it takes to get one of them.
All right. I spoke about this yesterday. Somebody just texted in and says, Mike, ask Andrew if he thinks the Bears would part with a 1 next year, and that would be from 20 to 12. If you're the Bears, you call the Eagles. I said, if I'm the Eagles, I'm demanding a first-round pick next year. You want a quarterback. I know you do. There's only one left. So if you want it, you got to pay a premium. Do you think, the text message wants to know if you agree with me that the Eagles could ask for a 1 in that case?
I certainly think that they should and they would ask for a 1 in that case. I just don't know. I think that might be where the conversation sort of ends if you're the Chicago Bears. And they may end up just going the Kyle Trask route and waiting a little bit and grabbing someone like that.
If the Eagles were in the 20 range, is there players in that range that you feel more comfortable with? Obviously you would than at 12, but are there guys in that 20 range that you would say, yeah, move back to 20 and grab this group of guys?
I mean, maybe a Russo. I mean, if you're talking about taking somebody in the 20s, he may fall just because of how raw he is. And at that point, I think that'd be decent value. There's always a chance that Kwity Paye kind of slides down there a little bit. I mean, I would look at pass rusher, possibly offensive tackle in that 17 to 20 range. But I mean, if I'm the Eagles, they're in a sweet spot at 12. I would stay right where they are because they should have their pick from some pretty good prospects, such as J.C. Horn and possibly Jalen Waddle and some of those guys.
Would you move back to 15?
15 is, to be honest with you, is the furthest that I would go because that's right in that spot where I think you could still get a Kwity Paye there,
right?
Or a Christian Barmore, the defensive tackle from Alabama. Someone like that, I mean, you can drop down to 15 and still probably get one of those guys.
Right. That means you would have dealt with the Patriots, obviously, if you were flip-flopping spots with them. All right, more draft questions are coming in for Andrew DiCecco. Your thoughts on this? How John Clayton was on with me Wednesday, and he said thought the draft was only about 5 rounds deep, that after that you're going to get a lot of undraftable players because of the amount of players that opted to stay in college. In other words, seniors that could have came out, but because of the COVID, elected to return as seniors again. So he feels that into the 5th round, you're going to get undraftable players. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that this draft is relatively deep in most areas outside of like defensive tackle. And I mean, you're still going to get some high-end players, in my opinion, in the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. So I mean, just like every year, there's going to be players that teams take a stab at on day 3 that they don't pan out or they're undraftable players. But at the same time, you're going to find some players that they're going to be some real gems, just like any year.
All right, Harris wants to know, hey Andrew, what running back late round? Give us a couple late round running backs. I guess the Eagles, they did sign Jordan Howard. They have Boston Scott. They got the group of guys from last year, Adrian Killins and Holyfield. I think they're still hanging around. So a late round running back on your radar.
Yeah, Elijah Mitchell from Louisiana Lafayette. I had a chance to, when I covered the Sun Belt Conference a couple of years ago for Pro Football Network, that I've really been following their whole running back rotation for the past few seasons now. And he has very little tread on the tires. He goes about 5'11", 215, terrific contact balance, navigating through traffic. It doesn't have that home run breakaway speed, but he's going to grind out those tough yards. He's a better pass catcher than he's initially given credit for. He's not flashy or anything like that, but I think he'd be a good complement to Miles Sanders.
Yeah, Louis Riddick was on with Greeny the other day and said, there's a lot of gaps and a lot of lack of information in this draft that it's making it hard for front offices to really get a handle here. So do you anticipate with 11 picks that the Eagles would try to use some of those picks to get more picks in next year's draft? In other words, like, hey, we'll give you picks here if you give us a pick in next year's draft. To get rid of some of the picks this year to add more next year.
Well, I mean, I kind of agree with that because the Eagles aren't necessarily in position right now to contend for anything, and it also gives a year for Nick Sirianni to assess what he has on the roster and the direction he wants to kind of head his franchise, and then you give your scouting department a little bit of a head start, knowing you have all this additional ammo and do some due diligence on a lot of these guys. So I think that, to a degree, I think that would be an interesting strategy.
You mentioned Christian Barmore earlier. A lot of people think this is a very thin defensive tackle class, but would you agree that Philly has to get one in this draft? You got Fletcher Cox aging, you got Javon Hargrave who's been hurt, and after that they're pretty thin. So is this a draft that they need to get one, and is it a thin class? Is there someone that they could have their eyes on?
Yeah, this is in all the years that I can recall. I think this is one of the more thin classes of defensive tackles that and next year, although it's a little early, next year doesn't look as much more promising either. As far as Christian Barmore, I mean, I think if they were to drop down to 15 or possibly 17 even down to there, he would be a good possibility. I mean, he's going to be the first and only defensive tackle to go in the first round this year. And after that, there's a big drop off. There's a lot of question marks for a lot of guys there. He's another guy that he had 1 year of production. He's freakishly athletic. He's 6'5", 310, moves really well, good pass rusher, disruptive. So if they're gonna get somebody that they expect to be a long-term starter, he would be the guy. Other than that, I mean, I think that they do need to add one. I mean, the depth behind Hargrave and Fletcher Cox is abysmal, and they need to add a young tackle at least, maybe a rotational guy that you could find in the third or fourth round.
Yeah, I know that the old regime, that was a very important position. I'm interested, Jim Schwartz liked to rotate those guys. I'm interested to see if that's the case, or are you going to get, a much higher percentage of snaps from the two starters? I mean, we don't really know that.
That's what I think's going to happen. I think they're going to have, extensive mileage because of the lack of depth, because of their financial situations. I don't know how you can you can't sign really anybody. And I mean, with 11 picks, you might get a defensive tackle, but I don't know that it's going to be a starting caliber defensive tackle. It might be a young player who doesn't have a lot of experience, maybe like a Jalen Twyman from Pitt, who is best in a rotational situation, good pass rusher and everything. But I mean, otherwise, you're looking at the Eagles roster right now. You got T.Y. McGill and Raekwon Williams, and just guys that are fringe players that are hardly short a roster spot.
All right, there we go. Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. That was the fastest 20 minutes I think I've ever had in the books.
Me too, man.
Yeah, right. A lot of questions. If we didn't get to yours, don't worry. Andrew will be on next week. We got plenty more time to get more draft questions in, and then the draft is here on Thursday, and we'll have plenty of coverage on Thursday's show. Andrew DiCecco. And, of course, the Inside the Birds podcast, it dropped yesterday. They got plenty of draft coverage. Andrew will be a part of the Inside the Birds mock draft. And make sure you check out the new mock draft, Inside the Birds, Monday morning, 6 a.m. And he, like August, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Andrew, last weekend before the players will actually be on rosters. How about that?
Yeah, how about that? Hey, I appreciate the questions, everyone. And Mike, have a great weekend, man.
You do the same. There he goes. Andrew DiCecco